And welcome everyone. We're now starting. So unlike last week when I started with the biblical account and then we went to an ancient Near Eastern story that had certain parallels and a lot of contrasts, this time I want to start with the ancient Near Eastern parallels, partly because we know the Noach story really well, and partly because the parallels I think are going to come out clearer if we start with the Near Eastern stuff, which is shorter also than the whole biblical story. And then we can kind of pick and choose in the biblical story to point out certain parallels that are interesting and the contrast of the story as a whole. Yehuda shared a couple of very interesting articles with me from Torah.com. I do recommend them. I am going to be using the article from John Day a little bit. I'll be referring to that. And let us begin. So I'm going to start with Gilgamesh. Now, let's talk a little bit about the history of, not the history, really the chronology, where we place Gilgamesh in this Atrahasis in our chronology. All right. So if we want to anchor things into kind of let's call it an academic chronology. In other words, we're saying when is pre-monarchic Israel and monarchic Israel, right? So that's the Iron Age. Pre-monarchic Israel, I'm actually basing myself right now on a timeline I had from my professor, Mark Smith. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I coming through clearly this time?
Just wonderful.
Okay, good. So pre-monarchic Israel, so that's like the Shoftim, would be about 1200 to 1000 BCE. So Mark Smith actually puts Saul at 1030 to 1010. He's probably doing it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, putting it such an exact date. And then the monarchy would be 1010 to 970, the United Monarchy. Now, if we look at Atrahasis is 1700 BCE. So way, way before pre-monarchic Israel. You're talking about 500 years. It's 1700, between 1700 and 1600 BCE, let's say. But it's way before pre-monarchic Israel. If you want to place it in a traditional biblical chronology, say around Abraham's time, more or less, maybe a little, more or less, around Abraham's time, let's say. That would be Atrahasis. Now, Gilgamesh, we have an earlier version, which is around the same time as Atrahasis. That earlier version, if you remember last week, when we looked at the story of Enkidu, we started filling, yes, I can also hear the thunder, appropriately enough. The old Babylonian version, which mainly was what we read for the Enkidu story last time, that's also from the same time as Atrahasis. But most of Gilgamesh, what we have is what's called the standard Babylonian version, and that's the 13th to 10th century BCE. So that is around, like, before the monarchy, let's say pre-monarchic Israel, something like that. Pre-monarchic through monarchic Israel. They found it in the Library of Ashurbanipal. So that gives us an idea. So once you're talking about the standard Babylonian version, you're well into what we would consider Israelite standard history, right? However, we know that this epic goes way back. It goes way back to Old Babylonian, and so just because we have this version in a later version doesn't mean we didn't have something very similar in the earlier version, which would have mainly kind of coexisted with Atrahasis. This story was not just in these epics. You have an older Gilgamesh epic in the Sumerian. You do have a small anyone who's not talking, okay, please mute yourselves. Okay, you do have a small kind of fragment of a flood story in Sumerian. However, that fragment's unusual. You don't have a flood story a lot in Sumerian. It really kind of, but you have it. You really takes off in Akkadian. Now, John Day's article, which is in the Torah.com, easily accessible, He talks about how we really should be comparing the flood story with Atrahasis, with Atrahasis as opposed to Gilgamesh. He makes some very good points. One of them, as we'll see, Gilgamesh, the flood story is brought in by the secondary character. He's like, Utnapishtim, how do you live forever? And he says, this is what happened, right? Whereas Atrahasis, it's a main part of the story. It also, Atrahasis is starts with the creation of the world. So it fits our version of the flood being part of that story of let's go back to the creation and tell the story forward, and we get to the flood, okay? However, there are a lot of parallels between Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, and there are certain parallels we see a little bit more clearly in the Gilgamesh story. As John Day notes, and as you could actually, it's pretty easy to get hold of the Berosus account of the flood, which is this Babylonian priest who lived during the Second Temple period, right? He lived around the time of Josephus. Josephus quotes him, and he has a version of the flood, which, again, John Day argues is even closer to our version, and therefore maybe it reflects something that was even more likely to have been the basis of the biblical story. I think that once you get that late, and you're talking about a Babylonian priest who's living in the Hellenistic world, and he's writing a history of his people, I'm not so sure he wouldn't have been affected by the Jewish people who were pretty prominent in Babylonia. Yes, thank you, Robin. Robin just put up the link to the article. So once you're talking that late, and you're talking in the Hellenistic milieu, especially people who are ethnically different from Greeks. In other words, they're explaining their story. I'm not so sure he wouldn't have heard of the Jewish flood story, which would have been way more central to Jews than to Babylonians. So that if you met a Jew and they'd be like, "Oh, you have a flood story? We have a flood story, right?" And then I would not be surprised to have someone kind of try to meld them together in his account, just because it's such a late account. There's some background noise from someone. So if you have anyone who has any background noise, please mute yourself. Excuse me just a second, please.
Could you open the door a crack?
Barkais?
Stop. Oh.
Yeah. Guys, Danny, mute yourself, please. Okay, thanks.
What does the word Gilgamesh mean?
Oh, that's a great, it's from Sumerian. In Sumerian, he's actually Bilgamesh, but I don't remember what it means. It's from the Sumerian. If Utnapishtim means day of life or life day, right? Which is apparently a reference to the fact that he lives forever. Okay, think of Napish, like that root, well, that's in life. So Utnapishtim is someone who is like life day life, you know. So one assumes it's like he lives an everlasting day or something like that. So with no further ado, let us dive into Gilgamesh. Okay, so we are reading from tablet 11. Now, tablet 11, of course, we only have in the Standard Babylonian. Most of Gilgamesh we only have in Standard Babylonian. Gilgamesh said to him, to Utnapishtim the faraway. Now, what happened is Enkidu, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are bestest buddies, and Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh is like, oh my God, there's death. I don't want to die. How can I avoid this happening? And there's this guy, Utnapishtim, who lives forever. So he's going to Utnapishtim to ask him, what's your secret? Okay, how can I live forever? So he goes and says, so Gilgamesh said to him, to Utnapishtim the faraway, as I look upon you, Utnapishtim, your features are not strange. You are like me. This is, even as I art down, I'm trained. It's you are like me. You are not strange at all. You are like me. My heart has regarded you as resolved to do battle, yet you lie indolent upon your back. How did you join the assembly of the gods in your quest for life? Utnapishtim said to him, to Gilgamesh, I will reveal to you, Gilgamesh, a hidden matter and a secret of the gods will I tell you. Shuripak, a city which you know. Okay, this is going to start in the middle of the story, all right? You don't know why there's a flood, okay? You don't know why there's a flood. There's a council of gods, and they've decided on a flood, okay? So there's a council of gods. There were Anu, their father, valiant Enlil, their counselor, Ninurta, their assistant, Enug, their irrigator, Ninigiku Ea was also present with them. Their words he repeats to the reed hut. Okay. Reed hut, wall, reed hut, hearken, wall, reflect. Man of, so he, in order to not, and we know it a little bit better from Atrahasis, this is, oh, thank you. You're right. This is page, oh, I had thought that this, I gave you this starting from page 93. I'm reading from page 93. If it's, Robin tells me it's page 2. So I'm reading now line 20. Okay, line 20, page 93. Okay. The one, in other words, it's numbered 20. Their words he repeats the reed hut, wall, reed hut, hearken, wall, reflect. What's going on? Ea is trying to avoid lying to the, like he was kind of sworn to secrecy. He's not supposed to tell it. So instead he's telling the walls. He's like, oh, walls, listen to what happened, right? And he knows that this is going to get through to Utnapishtim, okay, who he already has a relationship with. Man of Shurupak, son of Ubartutu, tear down this house, build a ship, give up possessions, seek your life, forswear worldly goods and keep the soul alive. Aboard the ship, take you the seed of all living things. The ship that you build, her dimensions shall be to measure. Equal shall be her width and her length. Like the Apsu, thou shalt seal her. The Apsu is what we would call the Tehom. In the kind of theology, in the ancient Eastern theology, Apsu is actually is kind of the lover of Tiamat. Tiamat is the salt sea, right? And he's kind of the fresh water from the depths. But we would call Apsu the Tehom, right? So like the Apsu, you shall seal her. I understood, and I said to Ea, my lord, behold, my lord, what you have just ordered, I will be honored to carry out. But what shall I answer the city, the people and elders? Right? They're going to see me building this boat. They're going to ask questions. What am I supposed to say to them? Because I'm the only one who's supposed to survive, right? He is helping me out, right? Ea opened his mouth to speak, saying to me, his servant, you shall then thus speak unto them. I have learned that Enlil is hostile to me. Enlil is, by the way, Enlil is the guy who wants the flood. Again, we'll get to Atrahasis. We'll see a little bit of this background. Enlil is hostile to me, so that I cannot reside in your city, nor set my foot in Enlil's territory. To the deep I will therefore go down to dwell with my lord Ea. So he says, I'm going to go, and I'm going to go to this place that's inaccessible except through the sea, and I'm going to live with Ea, who's my patron god, right? And I'll be safe from Enlil there, okay? But upon you, he will shower down abundance. The choicest birds, the rarest fishes, the land shall have its fill of harvest riches. He who thus orders the husk grains will shower down upon you a rain of wheat. Now, actually, what we're going to see, I want to make sure that it's in this version and not just in Atrahasis, excuse me. No, it's just in Atrahasis. It's actually he's actually being super cynical, because what he's saying are the signs of abundance are actually the signs that the flood is coming. Okay, so he's being really kind of he's really sneaky, okay? Sneaky is a nice way to put it. With the first glow of dawn, the land was gathered about me. The little ones carried bitumen. Okay, the little ones carried bitumen. In the critical edition of Gilgamesh, it's not the little ones, it's the rich man. He's taking the little ones from Atrahasis here. And bitumen, or bitumen, I always forget how to pronounce it, is, what is it? It is kofar, okay? It's kapuru. It's in, let me get my Akkadian version here. Give me a sec. Here we are. Sharu nashi kupra, okay? Kupra is Sharu nashi kupra. The rich man nosei kofer, okay? So the rich man comes carrying the what would we normally call it in Hebrew? What do we normally call the caulk that you put around a boat, the tar, so that the water doesn't seep in? What do we call it when Moshe is put in his little ark? We call it zephet, Zephet, right? But in this story, we call it Kofar. It's the only place we have it in the Bible, okay? Biblically, we call it Kofar. We shouldn't say it's the only place we have it with this meaning in the Bible, because our normal word for it is Zephet, but the Akkadian word for it is in fact Kapru. And we'll see it again in Atrahasis. Where was I at? Okay, reading from, I'm where it says lines 50 to 53. Okay, the little ones carried a bitumen, while the grown ones brought all else that was needful. Now I want to point something out. Everyone's helping him to build this ship, right? He needs help to build the ship. He can't do it on his own, right? So he tells them, I need to go to Ea to help me out. And they're like, sure. And they're all doing, he's paying them, right? But as we'll see, right? But they're all helping him. On the 5th day, I laid her framework. 1 whole acre was her floor space, 10,000 cubits the height of each of her walls, 10,000 cubits each of the square deck. I laid out the contours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I hammered water plugs. I'm going to kind of skip through all the details, right? But note he's saying the measurements of the ship, okay? And now he's going to make meals to keep everyone happy, okay? On line 70, bullocks I slaughtered for the people, and I killed sheep every day. Musk, red wine, oil, and white wine I gave the workmen to drink as the river water, that they might feast as on New Year's Day. I opened ointment, applying it to my hand. On the 7th day, the ship was completed. The launching was very difficult, so they had to shift the floor planks above and below until 2/3 of the structure had got into the water. Whatever I had, I laid it upon her, taking all the stuff. He said, Ea said, you'll forget riches, but he's not forgetting riches so fast, okay? So everything he had, he put on this boat. Whatever I had of silver, I laid it upon her. Whatever I had of gold, I laid it upon her. Whatever I had of all the living beings, I laid it upon her. All my family and kin, I made go aboard the ship. The beasts of the field, the wild creatures of the field, all the craftsmen I made go aboard. Shamash had set for me a stated time. When he who orders unease at night will shower down a rain of light. This is a horrible manufactured couplet, but what are you going to do? You should board the ship and batten up the entrance. That stated time had arrived. Okay, I'm skipping. I watched the appearance of the weather. I boarded the ship and battened up the entrance. Now this part is particularly nasty. Okay, I'm gonna again read it. This time I'm gonna again read it from my critical edition here. It makes a little bit of a difference. Okay, all right. To the man who sealed the boat, the shipwright Puzur Enlil. I know he says Puzur Amuri. It has to do with how you read the Akkadian signs. Okay, to the man who sealed the boat, the shipwright Puzur Enlil, I gave the palace with all its goods. Okay, what's going on here? Okay, he says, apparently, and again, we are learning this from the text. Apparently, there's someone who needs to stand on the outside. Like, you can pull it in, but there's someone who needs to seal things up from the outside. I assume seal with tar. In other words, he's worried about things going in through the door. So he has to seal it up. Someone from the outside has to seal it up. So he says to the guy who's going to seal it up, I'm giving you my palace. I'm giving you my house and all the stuff, anything that's left. And he's like, okay, I'll seal you up from the outside. How long is he going to enjoy this palace? Not long, right? And we in Utnapishtim know this. This guy is not, it's not a great deal for this guy, but he thinks it's terrific. Okay. And then we have the flood. Okay. There's a flood. Everyone dies, okay? And now I'm skipping to I think it's 113, which is at the top of the page. The gods were frightened by the deluge. So the gods themselves decide to do this thing, but it's so bad that they themselves are frightened, okay? And shrinking back, they ascended to the heaven of Anu. The gods cowered like dogs, crouched against the outer wall. Ishtar cried out like a woman in travail, a woman in labor. The sweet-voiced mistress of the gods moans aloud. The olden days are alas turned to clay, because I bespoke evil in the assembly of the gods, because she agreed to this flood. How could I bespeak evil in the assembly of the gods, ordering battle for the destruction of my people, when it is I myself who give birth to my people? Like the spawn of the fishes, they fill the sea. The Anunnaki gods, those are kind of these lower-level god judges. The Anunnaki gods weep with her. The gods all humbled sit and weep, their lips drawn tight. In Atrahasis, we're going to see their lips are drawn tight because they're thirsty and they're hungry. Why are they hungry? Why are the gods hungry when everyone's dying in the flood? Wild guess.
They can't feed the people.
Right.
Can't feed the gods.
Exactly. Nobody's feeding them, right? They forgot this part, right? They forgot that, okay, these guys, they want to get rid of them, but they need to eat, right? And they had already decided the people are supposed to feed them. Okay. 6 days and 6 nights blows the flood wind. When the 7th day arrived, I'm skipping around a little. When the 7th day arrived, I'm still continuing. The flood carrying south storm subsided in the battle. Okay, so it's been 7 days and it's over. All right. Utnapishtim is still talking. Okay, so he's the Noah character is talking. I looked at the weather, stillness had set in, and all of mankind had returned to clay. Right? They're all dead at the bottom of the water. The landscape was as level as a flat roof. I opened a hatch and light fell upon my face. Bowing low, I sat and wept, tears running down on my face. I looked about for coastlines of the expanse of the sea, etc., etc., etc. The ship stops on Mount Nasir, that this would be in Iraq. Mount Nasir held the ship fast, allowing no motion. Okay, it holds it there for 6 days. Okay, when the 7th day arrived, it's been 14 days. I sent forth and set free a dove. The dove went forth, but came back. Since no resting place for it was visible, she turned around. Then I sent forth and set free a swallow. The swallow went forth, but came back. Since no resting place for it was visible, she turned round. Then I sent forth and set free a raven. The raven went forth, and seeing the waters had diminished, he eats, circles, caws, and turns not round. Then I led out all to the 4 winds and offered a sacrifice. I poured out a libation on the top of the mountain. 7 and 7 cult vessels I set up. Right, so he gets 14 cult vessels he sets up. Upon their pot stands, I heaped cane, cedar wood, and myrtle. The gods smelled the savor. The gods smelled the sweet savor. The gods crowded like flies about the sacrificer. Now, I want to point out the gods here are not showing themselves in any kind of glory. I mean, this is really, I don't think this is like, oh, it's different in the, in the way that this type of poetry. No, I think you're kind of meant to look down on the gods here. Okay, they made a stupid decision. They didn't think it out. They killed everyone. And now they're crowding like flies around the sacrifice that he's making. Okay, because they're so hungry. When at length, as the great goddess arrived, she lifted up the great jewels, which Anu, the great goddess being Ishtar, right? You can see in your footnotes. She lifted up the great jewels which Anu had fashioned to her liking. Gods here, as surely as this lapis upon my neck, I shall not forget. Yes, the rain is getting heavy. How creepy, huh? Okay. I shall be mindful of these days, forgetting them never. Let the gods, so she's got a necklace, and the necklace is lapis lazuli, okay? And she's like, by this necklace, I will never forget, okay? Right? Keep that in mind. I think you're already seeing the parallel, okay? Let the gods come to the offering, but let not Enlil come to the offering. It was Enlil's idea, right? For he unreasoning brought on the deluge, and my people consigned to destruction. When at length as Enlil arrived and saw the ship, Enlil was wroth. He was filled with wrath over the Gigi gods. Has some living soul escaped? No man was to survive the destruction. Ninurta opened his mouth to speak, saying to valiant Enlil, who, other than Ea, can devise plans? It is Ea alone who knows every matter. In other words, now that they're full, they could be angry at the guy who saved someone against their plans, right? Who is that? They figure it's Ea. They're right, okay? And so Ea says, this was really dumb. He says, so the wisest of gods, thou hero, how could you unreasoning bring on the deluge? On the sinner impose his sin, on the transgressor impose his transgression. Yet be lenient lest he be cut off, be patient lest he be dislodged. I want to point something out here. This is a general principle that we don't have just in the Bible. The idea that a person should not be held responsible for someone else's sin and that collective punishment happens, but it sucks, is something that we see also we see it biblically, but we also see it as a general argument in the ancient Near East. Okay, so at some point we're going to take a look at Avram's dialogue with God over stone. Okay, we have Hittite king prayers which make a similar argument. Why destroy the righteous with the wicked? Okay, this is considered a genuine moral argument, even if people know that righteous people are frequently destroyed by the wicked. Okay, and now he's going to give him all sorts of other ways that they could have killed off people. Okay, instead of this stupid flood that was going to kill everyone. He said, instead of you bringing a deluge, would that a lion had risen up to diminish mankind? Instead of you bring a deluge, what if the wolf had risen? Instead of bringing a deluge, what if the famine had risen? Instead of you bringing a deluge, what if the pestilence had risen up? There are all sorts of great ways to kill people. Why'd you do this? That was dumb. It was not I who disclosed the secret of the great gods. I let Atrahasis hear. Utnapishtim is actually called Atrahasis. Okay, so you know that it's continuing that story. Okay, I let Atrahasis see a dream, and he perceived the secret of the gods. What was the dream? The dream was him talking to the walls, was Ea talking to the walls, right? So that's how he communicated with him. Now then, take counsel in regard to him. Okay, and so what they do is they take Utnapishtim. They say, you're gonna live far away. Okay, you're gonna live. Gilgamesh has to go through all sorts of things to cut. He has to find them. They're not easy. Utnapishtim lives kind of remote from everyone else. Utnapishtim and his wife. Okay, but he's going to live forever. Okay, that's what's going to happen to Utnapishtim. He's going to be remote from other people. But he actually, I'm not sure. Yeah. So they have to, he has to live far away, but he's going to live forever. Okay. And Utnapishtim's like, that's how he'll live forever. But he also, he does give him a way to live forever, which of course Gilgamesh messes up. That is Gilgamesh. Okay. Let's take a look at Atrahasis before we go back to the biblical account. How are we for time? We're okay. All right. So let me go. I'm going to need to read this off my screen. Okay. Hold on. Here we are, Atrahasis. Okay. All right. So what you have, I called it tablet 3, but it actually starts with what your piece starts with tablet 2. I'm just going to read the very beginning of tablet 2. That's the second page of the handout because the first page is the title page of the edition. Okay. So column 1, 1,200 years had not yet passed. Actually, I'm going to read a little bit further. 1,200 years had not yet passed when the land extended and the peoples multiplied. Actually, you know what? Sorry. I'm going to pause for a second in case there are questions. I didn't have a chance to really check. Let me take a look. Okay, Susan is asking me to recap the names and dates of the different flood stories. There are more than what we're looking at now, but these are the major versions that we have. Okay, so I want to say there's more than this. All right. Atrahasis is 18th century BCE, so between, so around, let's say 1700 BCE. Gilgamesh, the version that we're reading, is 13th to 10th century BCE. The Old Babylonian version, which we don't have for this, is 18th century BC. So the old Babylonian version is around the same time as Atrahasis, but we don't have it for this story. So the version that we're reading is much, much later than Atrahasis. If we're talking about, how long was the story continuing? So we have Berosus, a Babylonian priest, in 280 BCE. So this is the Second Temple period, who writes this down in his history, in his kind of Babylonian history for the Greeks. And it goes, the Gilgamesh story, but we do have a very fragmentary Sumerian account of the flood, which has certain similarities. We can see it's kind of the same story, but it's not all over Sumerian literature at all. And we also have something in Ugaritic also, a fragment of the flood story. So it was pretty popular. Why was Utnapishtim made immortal? This seems to be their way. It's kind of, if you read it, it's hard to figure out what it seems like. Let me go back to, now I have to open, I'm going to open my critical edition. Hold on. Where are you? Okay, go back. Okay, so okay. I don't have it here. Okay. All right. Okay, so it's the reason he's made immortal is because they've decided that because he's the one surviving member of humanity, he's going to be something in between, right? I mean, I'm not sure if the reason that he's in between is because he's the survivor, or if the reason he's in between is because he heard the secrets of the gods. So now you can't kind of let him just be a regular person anymore. Okay. And so it says in the past, Utnapishtim was one of man. So it says, because it starts with, I let Atrahasis see a dream, and so he heard the God's secret, and now consider what is to be done with him. Then Enlil came, he took hold of my hands and brought me out. He brought out my woman, he made her kneel at my side. He touched our foreheads, standing between us to bless us. In the past, Utnapishtim was one of mankind, but now Utnapishtim and his woman shall be like us gods. Utnapishtim, or it's something called Utnapishti, shall dwell far away at the mouth of the rivers. They took me and settled me far away at the mouth of the rivers. Okay, so he made him into this kind of intermediate level God. Okay, so that's, and again, is it because he knows a secret or because he's the survivor and so he gets the special status? You could read it either way, really. Okay, so now moving on to Atrahasis. Okay, so again, Atrahasis is much older. It's more fragmentary than the story we just read, but we'll find some interesting parallels as well. So I'm reading now from the second page of the handout, which is the beginning of the text that you have. 1,200 years had not yet passed. This is after the creation, right? When the land extended, after the creation of people. 1,200 years had not yet passed when the land extended and the peoples multiplied. By the way, the people are created because the lower level gods are working too hard. And they're like, we don't want to work this hard anymore. They're kind of rebelling. And so they create people, and the people are now going to serve the gods. They're the ones who are going to feed the gods. That's why people were created in Atrahasis, essentially. Okay, the land extended, the peoples multiplied. The land was bellowing like a bull. The god got disturbed with their uproar. Enlil heard their noise and addressed the great gods. The noise of mankind has become too intense for me. With their uproar, I am deprived of sleep. Cut off supplies to the peoples. Let there be a scarcity of plant life to satisfy their hunger. So in Atrahasis, actually, what you have at the end of the Gilgamesh story, where he's like, you could have done this and you could have done that. They do that stuff in the beginning of Atrahasis. In other words, they try all sorts of ways to kill people off. Let's have a famine. Then they're going to die. Then they'll be quiet, right? I'll be able to sleep. It doesn't work. It's not enough. They still multiply, okay? So they try a whole bunch of things to kill them off, and it's not enough. What is the problem with mankind? They are noisy. There are too many of them. Too many of them, and they are darn noisy. Now I am going to skip through. I'm just going to show it on the next page. If you look at, but also it's possible that they're being regularly kind of thwarted by Eo, who's helping the people. So it's not really clear. Okay, let's move right along. So I'm going to skip all the attempts to kill people. Let's go to the flood. It's also very fragmentary. So I am now skipping to tablet 3, which is, it's page 89 of this text. It's page 10 of your handout. Okay. So tablet 3. Atrahasis opened his mouth and addressed his Lord. Atrahasis opened his mouth and addressed his Lord. Teach me the meaning of the dream that I may seek its outcome. So it's coming in right after where we, if you remember in the Utnapishtim story, he's been hinting to him, right? He's been hinting to him what he should do, what's going to happen. Okay. Teach me the meaning of the dream that I may seek its outcome. Enki, here it's Enki who's telling him this stuff. Enki opened his mouth and addressed his slave. You say, what am I to seek? Observe the message I will speak to you. Wall, listen to me. Read wall, observe all my words. Destroy your house, build the boat, spurn property, and save life. The boat which you build, and now he's going to tell him how to do it. Roof it over like the opposite. We had that also in Gilgamesh, so that the sun shall not see inside it. Let it be roofed over above and below. The tackle should be very strong. Let the pitch be tough. Here, if you look, you actually have the Akkadian on the other side, so you can see kupru. The kupru is that it's using 3 symbols, so that's why it says kupru. So again, we have the kofer, right, which is the pitch. And so give the boat strength. I will rain down upon you here an abundance of birds, a profusion of fishes. Okay, and that's going to be the sign that the flood's going to start. He opened the water clock and filled it. He announced to him the coming of the flood for the 7th night. I'm on page 91 now. Atrahasis received the command. He assembled the elders to his gate. Okay, and so he gives the same explanation. Enki and Enlil, here he says Enlil is not angry at me, but Enki who is my patron god, and Enlil are arguing. So I'm going to be with Enki. Okay, fine. Here you have again the child carried the pitch. Okay. If we move on, okay, and here again, etc. They all help him out. Everyone's mainly here. They help him out. There's less because it's very fragmentary. We know less about what they did for him. With Gilgamesh, we really get in Gilgamesh we really get kind of the full betrayal by Utnapishtim of his people, who are all helping him out with his boat at great effort. Like he makes this whole thing about how hard the boat was to launch, right? And he knows they're all going to die, and he doesn't say a word or seem to care much. And he does things, and he does that very cynical thing, like the guy who closed the boat after him. He gives him his palace. Okay, so here we mainly see the destruction of the flood. Okay, so and it's also very fragmentary. I'm skipping now to page 95. That's page 13 of your handout. Okay. I'm going to, it's talking about how the gods are upset about the flood. So line 25, Enki was beside himself, seeing that his sons were thrown down before him. Nintu, the great lady, her lips were covered with feverishness. The Anunnaki, the great gods, were sitting in thirst and hunger. The goddess sighed as she wept, the midwife of the gods, the wise Mami. She spoke, let the day become dark, let it become gloom again. In the assembly of the gods, how did I with them command total destruction? Enlil has had enough of bringing about an evil command. Like that, to Tiruru, he uttered abominable evil. As a result of my own choice and to my own hurt, I have listened to their noise. My offspring cut off from me have become like flies. And as for me, like the occupant of a house of lamentation, my cry has died away. Shall I go up to heaven as if I were to live in a treasure house that was just abandoned the earth? Where has Anu the president gone, whose divine sons obeyed his command? He who did not consider but brought about a flood and consigned the peoples to destruction. Okay. Nintu was wailing. Okay, everything's terrible. Okay. Line 15, page 97. The gods wept with her for the land. She was surfeited with grief and thirsted for beer. Where she, yeah, she was so sad. She wanted a beer. I understand it. Okay. Where she sat, they sat weeping. Like sheep, they filled the trough. Their lips were feverishly athirst. They were suffering cramp from hunger. Atrahasis really spells out in a way that Gilgamesh doesn't just how much of this has to do with their hunger and thirst. Okay. For seven days and 7 nights came the deluge, the storm. Okay. And so again, we have 7 days of storm, and then we don't know how long, right? We don't have the rest here. Okay. We have a missing piece. All right. And in that missing piece, he brings a sacrifice. Okay. So we have the gods sniff the smell. They gathered like flies over the offering. Now, like flies here is restored. After they had eaten the offering, Nintu arose to complain against all of them. Where has Anu, the president, gone? Has Enlil come to the incense? They who did not consider but brought about a flood and consigned the people to destruction, etc., etc. Then she approached the big flies which Anu had made and was carrying. Now, there's this idea that lapis lazuli somehow looks like flies, as kind of a fly design. I once saw a picture of a necklace that was like that. It had some kind of, I don't remember if it was like, it's some kind of fly design with lapis lazuli. It's not clear. Somehow they look like flies also, which again possibly connects to why they're calling the god. They keep on saying the gods are like flies, right? So if you go to the next page on page 101, page 16 in the handout, in the line 2, let these flies be the lapis around my neck, that I may remember it every day and forever. Okay. Then Enlil sees a vessel. He gets angry. Why did someone escape? Etc. etc. He says something to Enki, and this is actually important. I'm going to go to the next page here. Come, summon Nintu, the birth goddess. You and she confirmed the assembly. Enki opened his mouth and addressed Nintu, the birth goddess. You, birth goddess, creatress of destiny, something for the people, something let there be. In addition, let there be a third category among the peoples. Let there be among the peoples women who bear and women who do not bear. This is now we're clear about what's going on with the birth goddess. Why are they talking to her? They're like, this was bad. We can't have another flood again. So how are we going to keep these people from keeping us up at night? How are we going to keep these people from over multiplying and making too much darn noise? And the answer is we're going to make some women barren. Okay. And we're going to make, and we've already skipped 2, right? We already skipped 2 categories, probably 2 other categories. Okay. Okay, maybe children who don't survive long, maybe, you know, who knows what it is, who knows what these horrible categories are, right? But there's a third category, and that is women who are barren. Okay, this is one of the ways to curb the people. And now we have, let there be among the peoples the Pashitu demon, to snatch the baby from the lap of her who bore it. Okay, establish Ugab to women and Igiti to women, and let them be taboo, and so stop childbirth. So here they're apparently, and I don't know enough about these categories, but it's apparently women that you can't mate with, right? That's what it sounds like. And so there's less childbirth. So you have women who are barren, you have these women who can't be, who are taboo, you have this Pashitu demon who essentially causes, it seems to cause miscarriages, stillborn children, and crib deaths, maybe especially crib. Like, it's clearly crib deaths, but probably also, like, if I may draw a much later parallel, like the demon Lilith, right? Lilith, as she developed, not in her original form, where she's just a name, and probably not originally a female. In the Middle Ages, she becomes the demon that causes that is dangerous for little babies and pregnant women. Okay. Now, I want to say a couple things about this because we're not going to get to it again. It's interesting. There's an article by Van der Toorn, which is really talking about how Atrahasis, what Atrahasis is trying to do here, which is, on the one hand, what's it trying to explain? What is Atrahasis explaining with this kind of, oh, so this is what happened in order to curb humankind? What's it explaining? It's not a trick question. What's it explaining by giving us the Pashitu demon, for example?
Why it's so hard to have children?
Right. Why do babies die? It's horrible. Okay. It's taking a horrible tragedy, pain that people feel intensely, and say, this is why this happens. This happens because of this deal that was made early on. And the same thing for barren women, which is also a tragedy that especially the women feel extremely, and one assumes their husbands. And this is explaining why that is. Okay, it's doing another thing also, and this is what Van der Toorn was saying, is it's bringing it in to a theological system. We don't think frequently of polytheism as being, but it is. Polytheism is a theological system. It's like we're explaining the world through these gods who control everything. Moral, not moral, they can control everything. Okay, so if people believed in this Pashitu demon, they didn't have to say, there was a name, they knew what this Pashitu demon was. But saying the Pashitu demon that you're thinking of is as this chaotic force, right? That's not controlled by anything. No. She's part of the God's plan. And all these horrible things that happen to human, they're part of this divine plan. It's within this theological system of the gods. Right now, this is not, we know from the kind of incantations against the Pashitu demon that people did not just say, oh yeah, she's reporting to the gods. They had things directly against the Pashitu demon. They saw her as chaotic. They didn't really accept this idea, but the person who wrote Atrahasis is trying to put forth this idea that no, she belongs to the divine system. And that's a lot like what we see later in the Second Temple period with these demons that are supposedly born from the Watchers. We'll talk about the Watchers myth in a later class. That in Second Temple books like Jubilees, they're brought under the divine system through this angel Mastema, who is like a Satan, and these are his guys, right? But he functions in the divine court. And so they're part of this divine system, whereas people, the same people who are reading the book of Jubilees, have these incantations against the descendants of the Watchers, looking at them as horrible, chaotic forces and saying to God, please stop them, right? So this is a similar move much later. And I actually read an article in terms of how the Bavli and other rabbinic texts deals with demons as well, and demons in a way being brought into the rabbinic system, which is interesting. So there's an idea, and there's this kind of wide-ranging desire to take these beliefs in chaotic forces and bring them into some kind of divine theological system which controls them, okay, which is interesting. All right, that's not any sort of parallel with Noach, but it's an interesting point about this text. It's also interesting when we actually look at an ancient Near Eastern text for itself. What is this text doing, as opposed to just comparing it to the biblical text, where we get a whole different picture, okay? Thank you, Eliza, for sharing this picture. If you can see in the chat, she shared a picture of a lapis lazuli fly necklace. It is Egyptian, so it's not, I mean, I think this is what I was thinking of probably. But it is, I mean, I'm pretty sure that this is what I was thinking of. However, it is Egyptian, which means that it would be in a different culture. So which is probably why they don't always show this necklace every time they talk about the flood story. Okay, so now if let's go back. Okay, so we've looked at a few things in terms of these ancient Near Eastern stories. Let's go back to the Noah story and see what we can learn by comparing it. What parallels, now I'm going to kind of, guys, you can unmute yourselves. What kind of parallels really leaped out at you as we were reading these ancient Near Eastern texts?
Birds.
The birds. They're sending out birds. Okay, they're sending out different birds each time, but they're sending out 3 times, right? So you have, and on the 3rd, the bird stays away, right? So that's a big parallel. Anything else? It used to really bug me the first time I read these texts. It bugged me the importance of the dimensions of the boat. Excuse me, the ship, right? The fact that both Gilgamesh and our story and the Tanakh story, the Torah story, see this strange importance in the dimensions of the ship, right? To me, it bothered me. It's like, why the dimensions? And you read Gilgamesh and like, oh, he also cares about the dimensions. And that's a parallel that there's, you know, it's weird when you don't have the parallel. And then when you have the parallel, you're like, oh, okay, so what do I do with that? Anything else jump out at people?
The animals.
The animals, right. So there's the idea that he takes all the animals. Now, in our text, it's very clear. It's either 2 by 2 or 7 by 7. This is a big, let's actually go back to the text and see how it's dealt with. There is someone, and this is in the article that was linked that you would have sent me, that Robin sent to everyone. He mentions that in a recent reading of Atrahasis, he saw 2 and he thinks that the animals are 2 by 2. Maybe yes, maybe no. When you have that strong a desire to find a parallel to a biblical text, I kind of, you have to really double check the reading. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I would want to check it though. Okay. So let's take a look and see. Now, as I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's super long, okay? Our text is really long, so I'm going to skip around in it a bit, all right? I'm reading from Perek Vav, Pasuk Hey, so that's 6:5, all right? 6:1-4 is a story for another time. So 6:5, all right? And I want you to note what the emphasis is here, besides the parallels. What's the emphasis here? What's being emphasized here that we didn't see emphasized in the previous versions, right? I should say previous versions, in the ancient Near Eastern stories of the flood. Okay. So God saw that the evil of people was great on earth, and all the inclination, I'm going to translate Yitzhak's inclination here, all the inclination of the thoughts of his heart, they were just evil all day. So God regretted that he made man. It was sad. Okay, so God said, I'm gonna wipe out man, who I created from the face of the earth, from men to animals, to the creeping crawlies, to the birds. Okay, because I regret that I made them. And God liked Noah. Okay, now I want to start with, why are people being destroyed? Guys, again, just chime in.
Because they're evil. They're doing
evil.
bad things.
People are evil. That's why they're being destroyed. In Atrahasis, why were people being destroyed?
They're disturbing the gods.
Annoying the gods.
They were annoying. They were noisy. They were super noisy. And why were they noisy? Because there were so darn many of them. There were so many of them. They're making too much noise because there's so many, right? So that's the problem in Atrahasis. Now there are people who have I wouldn't say argued, but I said maybe them being noisy is a way of saying they were being bad. But I think that the emphasis on their, they multiplied and they're noisy. I think it's that they're noisy. There's so many people that they're noisy. So he likes Noach. Now, why does God like Noach? Now, why did Ea or Enki, why did they like the Noach character? We don't really know. They seem, in both cases, it seems to be that the Noach character has, this guy is a patron god. So this patron god who has a relationship with him is going to get him out. It's by sneaking, right? By slipping him a secret that he got from the other gods, right? With Noach, okay, so first, right now, it's just that God likes him. We don't know why yet, okay? But if we continue on to actually the beginning of Parshat Noach, right, which is Pasuk Tet, verse 9. Ele toldot Noach, Noach ich tzadik tamim haya b'dorotav, et Elohim hitalech Noach. So Noach was a righteous man, pure in his generations. He walked with God, okay? So he's got a relationship with God, but he's part of having a relationship with God is that he is righteous, okay? And Sadiq also has the extra meaning of being innocent of a crime, right? So he has not done anything, right? He is not doing bad things, all right? Okay, and he has his kids. And I'm going to read from Yud Aleph, oh, one of the things I'm not dealing with now is repetitions in the story. I know, but right now what we're doing is we're doing the comparison. So we have limited time, okay? And also, whatever, there are different things you prepare when if you're gonna tackle repetitions. So the earth went bad before God, and it filled with violence, it seems. Right? So God saw that the earth has just been destroyed because all flesh has destroyed its way on the earth. Now, I want to point out something here that you can read this differently than the previous account, where the previous account only people went bad, and here all flesh went bad. Right? In the Midrash, you have that idea that because people went bad, the animals started interspecies mating, right? But at least here, it's much more clearer why all animals would be destroyed, because apparently all flesh has gone bad, right? Not just people. Whereas in the previous few verses, it was just the people, and then God suddenly saying, and now I'm going to destroy everything. Like, whoa, right? But here all flesh has gone bad. Again, with all flesh, right? End of all flesh has come before me because the whole earth has gone bad. Okay. So the whole earth has been has filled with violence. So I'm just going to destroy everything on the face of the earth. Now we're going to get the instructions for the ark. Here we have, and you cover it, and you should coat it. It's using the verb of kofer, right? You should kind of tar it with tar, right? From inside and from outside to make it waterproof, right? Once again, okay, this is an unusual use of the word kofer. We don't see it elsewhere. The normal biblical Hebrew word would be zephet, which is what we see by Moshe, and it seems to be reflecting the kupru of the story. Now, it doesn't have to be. I want to point something out here also. And this is also, if you read the article from John Day, he's very much like, oh, what is the biblical story based on? Is it based on Gilgamesh or Atrahasis? I think it's based on Atrahasis because there are these much better parallels with Atrahasis. And I think that is a modern way of thinking about these ancient texts. To think that someone sat down with a text and based another text on it is works for now when we're a very written culture, okay? When you're talking about the ancient Near East and ancient Israel, you're still talking about a really oral culture. I'm not making a statement about ancient Israel, they couldn't read or something, but I'm just saying that mainly you're not reading. Mainly it's an oral culture. People know these stories, they've heard these stories, they've repeated these stories, okay? Now the Noach version of the flood is in certain cases reacting to these stories. It's like, these are the stories you've heard. That's not the way it happened. That's not the meaning of the story, right? But they didn't have to have written it. So you say, oh, but what about a word like kofar? They would have heard it in Akkadian, right? They would know it from the Akkadian. And someone who would retell it in another language from the Akkadian would be much more likely to use an Akkadian word that people speaking Hebrew would understand. It's more likely that those words would seep into the story. You don't have to have a situation where someone's looking at one text and looking at another and be like, oh, this is what I'm going to do, right? I think that that's a more realistic explanation of the way the biblical text reflects ancient Near Eastern stories. Now, I am going to say something about the chronology here, right? So if you're talking about, let's talk about a traditional chronology, okay? So you say, okay, the Torah is given to Moshe at Sinai. Well, that is after the earlier, that's certainly way after Atrahasis. In other words, people know these stories, all right? If you want to say, what did this story mean to the first audience, however you look at it, that first audience knew these other stories. And a lot of times you understand the biblical account better if you're like, what is it saying in contrast to the stories that everyone knew? Okay, that is how I see a lot of this, not all of it. Because again, for me, it's less. I'm so used to it now that it doesn't bother me as much. When I first learned it, it really bothered me that both texts were kind of obsessed with the dimensions of the ark. Like it bugged me. Anyway, okay, so this is what you do. He gets instructions of how to build it, dimensions, floors of it. Sohar, I'm just going to say, because everyone said, what is Sohar? Sohar in Tet Zayin is verse 16. Sohar tasel teva. Even in modern, if people say, oh, well, officially it's like some kind of skylight. Is it a gem? It's either a skylight or a roof. There are two possible etymologies. One is that it's a roof, then maybe it's a gabled roof and Gag is a flat roof, or it's a skylight. Because it's not clear what it is. Okay. Okay. And Vani, now I'm reading from Yud Zayin, that's 17. Vani hineni mevit mabul mayim al haaretz l'shachet kol basar shebo ruach hayim mitachat hashemayim kol asher ba'aretz yigva. So God says, I'm bringing this flood. Everything on earth is going to die. Everything. Okay. V'akimoti et briti itach, and I'm going to keep my covenant with you. Uvata el teva ata uvanecha v'ishtecha u'neshev anecha itach, and you should come to the ark, you and your sons and your wife and the wives of your sons with you. This also we saw in Gilgamesh. Bring your family. He brought his family with him. I think in the Atrahasis also. When we call hachai, mikol basar shnayim mikol tavil hatevel achayotihach. Now this is I want to point something out here. This was not a divine command in the other two versions we read. We don't really know what it was in the Atrahasis. In Gilgamesh, this was Utnapishtim's decision. Utnapishtim took whatever animals he had, plus some wild animals, right? He took whatever he could take, right? He's told to take seed with him, but it's not, here there's this real emphasis, right? Because it says how many he should take, everything that, mikol basar, right? From all the animals that exist, you should take two, right? That you should bring to the, should bring to the ark, lachayot itach, to make live with you. Zachar u'nekeva yiyu, male and female should be. Meha ofli minehu min habehema limina Every species you have to have two. Okay, now this shows a different kind of concern than what we saw in the ancient Near East. In the ancient Near Eastern epic, he's like, I'm doing you a favor. I'm giving you a way to get out of this thing that God's decided already. Here's kind of the tricky way to get people to help you, and then they'll die. And you just try and take as much with you as you can, you know? Because I'm helping you like behind the scenes. Here's a completely different thing. You, Noach, are going to keep some animals alive. You're the one who's going to allow these animals to live. Okay, you have to make them live with you. You have to take males and females so that they can reproduce afterwards. Okay. Remember to take food for you and the animals. Okay. And Noach does everything God told him. Okay. And now we have the second account, okay, where God's telling Noach what to do, right? God says to Noach, you and your whole household should come to the ark. Why? Because I saw that you're righteous in this generation. Okay. Now this, if you want to say the second repetition, is the one that emphasizes how Noach is righteous. Okay. That's what saves him. He's righteous. It's not some special relationship. It's that he's righteous, and God sees he's the only righteous one. He saves him. Okay. Here he's going to take 7 of each. Okay, of the pure ones, and with the non-impure ones, you take 2. Why do you need 7 of the pure ones?
To offer korbanot.
Right, he's gonna have to give sacrifices, right, of the pure ones. So he's gonna need extra. Okay, and he has to bring 14 of the birds. Right, l'chayot zera pnei kol haaretz. So they can still multiply. And I shouldn't say multiply. So they should still have existence. They should still continue on the earth. Here, so it's 40 days and 40 nights. In the ancient Near Eastern epics, we saw 7, right? 7 days and nights. Here it's 40 days and nights. 40 days and nights biblically always means a long time, super long time. 40 days and nights. Okay, that's like the way you say it. Okay, so it's super long time. So I'm going to destroy everything, right? Everything that I established on the earth, I'm going to destroy. And Noach does everything he tells him. Okay, so Noach is 600 years old. There's a flood, etc., etc. He does everything God told him to do. All right, he brings them 2 by 2, and then after 7 days, all right, the floodwaters are on the earth. Okay, so now it's giving you the dates. This is the day that it stopped. Okay, and there was rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. So we had 7 days, and now we have 40 days. Okay, all right. So I'm just skipping around to the interesting stuff. Okay, so now, so it's he's not in the ark yet. Right, he's gonna have it's 7 days. It's 7 days, right? And the floodwaters come down, right? And it's starting to rain 40 days and 40 nights, and they go on, and then they go on. Then they actually go on the ship. Okay, so they go on the ark. So I'm reading verse 15 now. So Noah comes into the ark with 2 of every animal. Who built the ark, by the way, in this account?
Noah.
Noah built it. We don't hear about anyone else helping him build it, right? That whole very cynical thing we read about in Gilgamesh and Atrahasis is not happening here. Only Noah is building it, right? If he had help, we don't know about it. Okay? And male and female of all flesh came. It's really emphasizing they're going to be able to continue after this flood. As God commanded him. And God closed the ark after him. Who closed the ark after him in Gilgamesh? What happened?
The people that were helping.
The guy that he promised his palace to the guy, so he'd close it after him, right? In a very cynical kind of move. Yeah, I'll give you the palace till you're dead. Right? And the guy
Yeah.
closed it after him. And here God closes it after him. There are no other people helping him. There are no other people being taken advantage of. Now, of course, this is the way I'm reading Beis Garshan Badal. You can have your own things, but I think that that's what the point is, right? That there's this idea that someone needs to be on the outside to close you up. So the way Gilgamesh got around that was he just promised him this extravagant reward. And here, the way biblically we get around it is that God Himself closes him up, because this is not the same thing. Okay. Now I also want to point out, what does it mean if we compare it to the ancient Near Eastern epic? Why would it be important that God says 7 and 7? Bring the 7 and 7 of the pure. What contrast is that with Gilgamesh and Atrahasis? This is a God who plans for the future. They were like, oh yeah, let's kill all the people. And they're like, oh, we're starving. This is a God who knows. This guy's going to have to bring sacrifices when he lands. He's going to need 7 of each of the pure animals. Or he's going to need 2 by 2 so that they can all populate again. Right? This isn't an impulsive God who's just destroying humans on a whim. Okay. Okay, so we have the flood, everything's wiped out. I'm skipping to Perek chapter 8, okay? Vayiskor Elohim et Noach v'et kol ha'chaya v'et kol b'hema asher ito b'teva, v'yaver Elohim ruach al ha'aretz v'yeshoku hamayim. So God remembers Noach, okay? Why? We don't know. It doesn't explain why God remembers Noach. Right? In the ancient Near Eastern epics, there are 2 reasons why the gods end the flood or are paying attention. Okay. We're not really ending the flood. It seems like the flood ends kind of on its own because everyone's dead. But there are 2 reasons they're paying attention. One is they're hungry, and the other is they're mourning the stupid thing they did to destroy everyone. Okay. And here it just says God remembers Noach. Okay, and he closes up everything. He stops the water. Okay, and it stops in Hare Ararat. Okay, that's the mountain that ends that the biblical ark is on. All right, so and in fact, at the end of 40 days, Noach opens the window, right, of the ark. And I'm reading now Pasuk Zayin, verse 7. Vayishalach et ha'orev v'yetzei yatzo b'shov ad yivosh et hamayim. So he sent the raven, right? And Vaishalach et hayona miito lirot hakalu hamayim me'al pnei adama v'lo matza hayona manoach. Okay, then he sends out a dove, and the dove doesn't find a place to sit, right? Then she comes back to the ark. Okay, and then he waits another 7 days, and he sends out the dove again. So it's been raven, dove, dove. Okay. Vatavo elav hayona le'et erev, and the Yonah comes, the dove comes back at evening time. Hine alei zayit taraf b'fiha, and she's holding an olive branch. V'yada Noach ki kalu hamayim me'al haaretz, and so Noach knows that now there's the water has receded from the land. V'echel od shiv'at yamim acherim v'shalach et hayona v'ois v'shuvei elav. And so he waited 7 days, and he sent the dove, and then didn't come back. So you have actually, it's a little bit different. You don't have 3. He sends out the dove 3 times. Before that, he tries sending out the raven once, and he's just and it just kind of went back and forth. And he's like, okay, forget the raven. And then he switched to the dove, and he sent the dove out 3 times. Okay, and as opposed to just going out and coming back, the second time it brings a sign, and then the 3rd time it doesn't come back. So there's more of a kind of a progression. Okay, so then he takes the cover off of the ark, all right, and the land is dry. And God says, I'm reading from Pasuk Tidvav, verse 15. God said to Noach, saying, come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and the wives of your sons with you. כל החיה אשר ידך מכל בשר, בעוף ובבהמה ובחומר ומארץ על הארץ, היצא איתך ושרצו בארץ ופרו ורבו הארץ. All the animals, all the different types of animals, you should bring out with you, and now they will multiply on the land. Okay, now they're going to multiply. So they come out with all the animals, and the first thing Noach does, and he builds an altar to God. And it takes from all the animals, from all the pure animals and birds, and he brings a sacrifice. And God smelled the good smell, the incense. But not the incense, the smell of the sacrifice. And God said to himself, Lo osif l'kalel otet hadama before Adam, ki yitzer lev hadam raminu rav, v'lo osif od la'akot et kol chai kasher asiti. I will not continue to curse the land because of man, because the inclination of man's heart is bad from his youth, and I will not continue to strike down all life the way I have done. Now, I have said this before, I will say it again. I think the whole point is man is so bad, I can't link what happens to animals to man anymore. Like that, there was this kind of still continuum of man with animals before Noach, and what happened was men went bad, and that meant that everything's bad. I can't do that because men can be evil, and that's not the animal's fault. So I'm not going to destroy the whole world anymore. Not for man. Okay. From now on, we're going to have regular days and regular seasons. It's never going to stop. We're not going to have this kind of weird flow. Okay? Now, this is something that Tikva Freimer-Kensky points out. Alea Shalom. This is something she points out, that God blesses Noach and his children, saying, "What? Multiply and fill the earth." People should be multiplying; they should be filling the earth. If we read this on the background of the ancient Near Eastern epics that we just read, right? This is what Tikva Freimer-Kensky says, and I think she's absolutely correct. The point is, God wants you to multiply. It's not like what those stories that you know, where it's because people were multiplying and the gods are like, oh, they're too noisy, we've got to stop them. No, God wants you to multiply. God wants you to fill the earth. That's not the way God is, right? God doesn't want you to be evil. God doesn't want you to be wicked, but he wants you to multiply. People, and your job is not just to bring sacrifices. Your job is to be good and to keep the earth. And Noach's job was to save the animals. Note that in the other versions we read, it says he brought animals on, right? And he was supposed to bring animals on. And then we don't find out anything about them. Like he brings a sacrifice, but we don't find anything about it. The animals, that's not a point. That's not a point to the story. The point of the story is to explain why there are barren women and miscarriages and crib deaths. I'm not saying that's the only point, right? But that absolutely is something that comes out of it. Here, there's a major point of Noach going into the ark was to save all the animals, right? This is a big part of it. Of course, to save himself, but also to save the animals, right? So now, and this connects less to the epics and more to to what I argue is going on here, right? It says, God says, Umarachem, let me make sure I didn't skip anything, right? So you should multiply. He already said about the animals that they should multiply, right? And over the whole earth. Now it's humans. You should multiply and fill the earth. Your fear of you will now be on every animal and every bird, right? Everything that's on the earth and all the fish of the sea is given to you. Anything that lives, you can eat. It's going to be like grass. Before you ate grass, like that is absolutely, I think that's absolutely the assumption of this text. Before you were vegetarians. It's like grass to you now. They're living beings and you can eat them. Okay. Ach basar benachsho damo lo tochelu. But don't eat the blood, right? V'ach etimchem lenafshotechem edrosh. But I'm going to demand your blood for your lives, to your lives. Miyad kol chaya edroshenu. Any animal that like attacks you, that eats you, I'm gonna call to account. Umiyad ha'adam, and from the hand of man. Don't think that because you could eat other living creatures, you can kill people, right? Again, the emphasis being there used to be this continuum, and now you say, oh well, if I can eat a living thing, then I can kill that guy who's annoying me. No, you can't. Umiyad ha'adam, umiyad ish achiv edroshet nefesh ha'adam. From the hand and from each a man from his brother, I will demand the life of the person. Shofech dam hadam ba'adam damo yishafech. A person who spills the blood of man, because of man, his blood will be spilled. Okay? In exchange for the person he killed, I know you say ba'adam, you threw a man. What it probably means is because of a man, his blood will be spilled. It's a little cute little kind of poem. Certainly a chiastic structure. This is the classic chiastic structure. You guys know what a chiastic structure is? A, B, C, B, A, right? So you have shafech, dam, hadam, badam, damo, yishafech. Okay, it's a very pretty little chiastic structure that makes a nice little poem. Ki b'tzelem Elohim asat ha'adam, because God made man in his image. In other words, people are different from animals. This is a further continuation of the idea we saw with Adam and Chava. People are not animals. We saw it first starting with Adam and Eve, and now we're seeing it continuing, pretty much completing with Noah. They're so different from animals that you can eat animals, you kill each other, and you will die. Okay, that's the rule. Batem purvu shetsuv aretz revuva, and you be fruitful and multiply. You'll swarm on the earth and multiply in it. Okay, so again, this kind of emphasizing, no, you're supposed to multiply. Don't listen to those other stories. Multiply. And I am going to keep my covenant with you and your children after you. Now I'm going to talk about a covenant that includes everyone, people and animals. So the covenant that I'm going to keep with you now is that all flesh is not going to be destroyed by flood. There's not going to be a flood that's going to destroy the whole earth. Now this is a covenant not just with human beings, but with all living creatures. Okay. And what he's going to say, and so God says, this is going to be a sign. What's the sign? The rainbow. Right? And what do people who are learning this on contrast this with? They contrast it with the lapis lazuli necklace, right? That we don't know why it's coming up, but she's like, buy my lapis lazuli necklace. I will remember this forever. Okay. So they connect those two things. Okay. Even though here, if you just told me, if I didn't have this and you said, what does it mean, the lapis lazuli necklace? My assumption would be the stars. Like, what does a lapis lazuli necklace look like that I would think this is a necklace on a goddess and it's supposed to be to remember to remember the flood? My guess would have been stars. It would not have been a rainbow, but whatever. Okay. So that's that is the sign that God is keeping his covenant with the entire earth. Okay, not to do another flood, right? And we don't follow it up with anything else that God's going to use to kill people. Right? Because the point was not that people were multiplying too much or making too much noise. The point was that people were being wicked and were causing the whole earth to go back. Right? And that can't happen anymore. So I'm going to pause now before our few minutes of conclusion. How are we doing for time? Okay. Don't worry. I know you guys. We're finishing. Okay, but I want to take a look at these comments and questions. Okay. Maybe the dimensions are meant to show the ark is huge. Maybe. But the question is, like, for me, again, it's hard for me even to get back there. I just remember how much it bothered me because I had it always bothered me that why are we going into the details of the ark's construction here? And then when I look at an ancient Near Eastern epic that also for seemingly no reason is going to details of the ark's construction, things that make you go, So that's it. But sure, what material would they have had for a skylight? It wouldn't necessarily have been a material. Like you could have said, well, make a window, make it lift up, like that kind of skylight. Or something that it's a construction that's like this, where there's a gap, so that the light can come in through this kind of double roof. Maybe the star was an opening sheltered by roof. Right. That would be the idea of the skylight. I am surprised at the idea that animals have will, that they can sin as in hishchit kol basar. Can we read the story without this idea? I do think that we can read the story with the idea that somehow people sinning, okay, somehow, again, I'm biased here because I really do think that this has to, because and that's completely my interpretation, that this has to do with how close people are with animals and the idea that they're tied together. So people being really evil is enough to make everything go kind of wonky and bad, right? We don't know what hishchit means. Again, you had the whole midrash that says that you have the midrash that says it's bestiality, right? Which actually would make a lot of sense, because what could you say would destroy an animal without the animal doing anything bad, right? I'm reminded there used to be a YouTube series called Mr. Deity, right? And there's this Mr. Deity, and he's like a stand-in for God, and he's like dictating the Bible to his assistant. And he's like, well, what happens if someone like does something with a cow? And he's like, well, stone him. He's like, stone him and the cow. He's like, and the cow? He says, and the cow, sir? He's like, yeah, stone him and the cow. And he says, that's a really bad day for the cow, sir. And it's like, that is a terrible day for the cow. I never thought of that before. but the idea, it's the only thing that I can think of. I mean, it's a midrash, and you can understand it, because how could you possibly read ki shchit kol basar given that animals are animals? What does that even mean? Okay. There are situations that people have put animals in that have caused them to go bad, right? So people could do that. Like people can train animals to do horrible things, and people can also put animals in situations where they kind of rebel and do horrible things. You can think of situations like that, but I don't think that it's being that specific. Is one of the punchlines here in the Babylonian flood story that the gods need people to feed them with sacrifices also one of the punchlines that we dealt with last week in the Babylonian creation story? Humanity was created, yes, and was created to feed the gods with sacrifices. Yes, and in Atrahasis, it's part of the same story. In Atrahasis, the narrative goes from them being created in order to feed the gods, and then afterwards you get to the flood where they're being too noisy, and the gods for some reason have forgotten that these were the guys they meant to feed them, right? Or they're so bothered that they just kind of go wild. But yes, absolutely, it's part of the same idea, particularly in the Babylonian creation story, because it's Atrahasis, it's the same story. Interesting argument from Ralbag that man was not originally vegetarian. Okay, Robin, I'm not going to read the article while everyone's waiting. What's the argument?
It's an essay from Marty Lokshin, who says that Ralbag was worried about a Christian issue, which is in the New Testament, where the non-Jews are allowed to eat non-kosher food. And it looks very similar to the verses we just read about saying now you're allowed to eat meat. And he's saying, if we say that man had to be vegetarian and then was then allowed to eat meat later on, but God changed his mind, then the Christians could argue, yes, we can do the same thing. So he wanted to say, no, you can't read it that way. You've got to say that man was always allowed to eat meat. And you shouldn't give this opening to a Christian argument.
So does he say that man was always allowed to eat meat, but he just didn't know it?
No, he was always allowed to eat meat, and he was wrong to read the verse in Bereshit as if he was only allowed.
So read it completely wrong. So like that would be completely wrong.
Yeah. He was saying you should know that you can even eat vegetables, was apparently how the Ralbag reads it.
Okay. Yeah.
Mary, is
Yes.
there archaeological evidence of a flood? in the Middle East at the time these texts came about, or afterwards?
I have to look. I remember reading something, but I certainly wouldn't sign on it. You know, I'd have to look. Also, you're going way back with these stories. The stories go back so far. Like again, if you're talking about the Sumerian stuff, so that's even older. Like again, Sumerian stuff is kind of on the fringes. It's not like a central story. The flood, they found like one fragment of a flood story. But I don't. I'm sure you can find someone who says so, but I don't remember. So I have Susan says, I've read flood stories reflect the annual rise of the Tigris and Euphrates. Yeah, I mean, if floods are something that worry you, then I could see someone coming up saying, okay, let's have a story where you don't have to be scared of the flood because they're never going to do a flood again. But that's much more the biblical story than the ancient Near Eastern story. Like the ancient Near Eastern story, I'm not saying that it's not saying there's not going to be a flood again, but that's not a real huge emphasis. It's much more like, oh, don't worry, gods have other ways to kill us now. So I don't know, but I think the question was more: is there evidence of a major flood that people would have been like, oh, remember that major flood? Yeah, Robin.
Well, there's a very big claim that the Black Sea, which flows past Istanbul, was once upon a time, there was a barrier there, and that in sometime in ancient history, it broke through a barrier and created a huge deluge in the area of, and that was a historical event.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, are there any other questions or comments before I finish up and close? Okay, so I yeah. Okay, so what I wanted to kind of convey, and I hope that people got from this class, besides the raw data, right, is this idea that we can get a richer understanding of a biblical text sometimes when we compare and contrast it with the ancient Near Eastern text, even when it raises questions, right? We can see a very different feel to the story. If we look at if we look at the ancient Near Eastern stories where the emphasis is on this kind of sneakiness and how the gods as a group are morons and impulsive and want people to not be a lot because all they need are the sacrifices and they just don't want them to multiply, and so they'll do these crazy cruel things just to keep people in check, right? And that the way to get around it is to have a relationship with a patron god who's going to slip you information and betray everyone around you, right? If necessary. All of those ideas and that is kind of, and the whole feel of the story which is explaining certain things, but really sees the gods almost as antagonists, and foolish antagonists at that, has a very different feel than the Noah story, where the point of the story is this. The point of the story more is more the corruption of humankind, and that being righteous and saving the world, like being righteous kind of goes along with saving the rest of life, right? And now humans are above animals in a way that they weren't before. And this idea that God cares whether people are good or not, but God also cares whether it makes sense to have such a ridiculous punishment, right? Okay, yeah, they're evil, but I can't destroy the world anymore. That's just wrong. Okay, so even with these elements that tie them together and that sometimes feel kind of problematic, like frankly the sacrifice right after Noah lands, right, which feels a little weird. Once you read it compared to the Utnapishtim, the Gilgamesh or Atrahasis stories, when you look at how different the emphasis is, and the little places where it's clearly meant to be a reaction to these ancient Near Eastern stories and say, no, God wants you to multiply. God wants people He wants people to live. He wants people to multiply, right? And God doesn't want you to trick someone into sending him off. You're going to do what everyone's going to die. You need to build a boat. You build a boat on your own, right? Certain values that come across in the biblical text, which make the whole story feel different. Yeah, we can compare it so much that it starts looking the same. But the fact is that on the one hand, it is kind of in dialogue with these stories, right? And it's in dialogue with stories, and at the same time is very different in its final thrust and tone, and for good reason. I'm going to just answer these questions and then say good night. Are there A&E parallels to the Noach getting drunk story? There are parallels, I think, in mythology in general, in the discovery of wine. I mean, but I don't think in terms of the Noach story of getting drunk. Gods are basically just selfish, whereas the God in the Bible is only concerned with his creation's welfare. Well, he's concerned with more than his creation's welfare, because he's concerned that it went bad, right? So like if everyone just had to exist, then there wouldn't be a flood, right? If the whole point was just existing, right, then God wouldn't have a flood and kill everyone. But the point is that you're not supposed to be bad and corrupted, and to maintain a basically okay world, and it fits the way our Noach story works, with all the problematic, and the repetitions, etc. It does work as, again, a continuation of this idea that we have in our creation story, again, in both, where people are supposed, or really the second one, where people are supposed to take care of the earth, right? And that's people's job, as opposed to feeding God, right? They're supposed to take care of the earth. They're either the culmination of creation, or they are there to be guard the garden, as it were. And so that's their role. So when the world goes bad, you take the righteous man, and he's got to make sure, God gives him instructions. This is how you ensure that all living beings will continue to exist. That's your job as a person, right? And it's a continuation of this idea this thrust that we already had from the creation through Adam and Eve. So thank you everyone for joining me. This was really nice. Nice to see you, nice to teach you, nice to talk with you. And I will try and get this up as soon as I have the recording. So have a good night, everyone. I'm going to get the link from Yehuda for next week's class. Thank you again, Yehuda. And I will share it with everyone on Facebook and email. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Miriam.
My pleasure.
What are you doing next week?
Yeah.
That is a good question. I will let everyone know. Okay, I'll let everyone know as soon as I've decided. There are a lot of different ways to go, so I have to see, and I have to figure out what's going to fit in the time.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miriam.
Okay. Have a good night. Bye.
Good.